Good evening. Welcome to our parent support webinar. I'm Valencia Hike, the community school coordinator for Edgecombe Circle Elementary, and I'd like to welcome our partner, Lighthouse, and Catherine, who's going to be our presenter for this evening. Thank you, families, for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We're excited to do this presentation for you and provide some extra support for you as parents. And so my name is Catherine. I'm a counselor at a clinic called Lighthouse Youth and Family Services. We're a nonprofit youth services bureau in Catonsville. Um, Although right now we're closed, so we're doing everything remotely from our homes. But we have put together this presentation tonight to help provide more support for you. I know that this has been a very stressful time for everyone, but I know that parents are experiencing a whole lot more stressors having to help out with kids at home and with online schooling and all of the additional stressors. So we're really glad to have you tonight. I will also be joined by one of our other counselors, Megan, who you'll see in just a little bit. So we'll go ahead and get started. Couple just housekeeping items. So you may have noticed your videos are off and your microphones are off as well. So it's just the panelists or the presenters who are going to have their videos and microphones on. However, if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, you are more than welcome to post them. There is a Q&A that you should see at the bottom of your screen where you can enter your questions, and we'll be monitoring those throughout the presentation. And we will have a couple spots for a question and answer built into the presentation. But we may answer questions along the way if there's anything that's related to what we're talking about at the moment. The presentation is being recorded, so just so you're all aware. And then it's a judgment-free zone, so do feel free to ask any questions that you have. No question is a dumb question. We are here to help you and to provide support and answer any questions that you have. So feel free to answer any or enter any questions that you have into the Q&A box. All right, so our presentation has three parts. So the first part, we're going to be talking about stress, where it comes from, what causes it, like what are some of the stressors that we have been experiencing and that you all have probably been experiencing. Then we'll get to a section about how to actually manage the stress and what to do about it. And then we'll talk about some resources that might be helpful that you can access online or in the community towards the end of the presentation. All right, so first we're going to start off with a poll. So I'm going to open the poll up to you in just a minute. But first we're asking, have you felt stressed recently? So I'm going to open that up. And you should now be able to answer that. All right. All right, so it looks like 100% of you have felt stressed recently. Not surprising, we've all been going through a lot of stressors recently, and you're also attending this webinar. Next question, do you feel more, less, or the same level of stress now compared to before the pandemic? And I will put that up. All right, you should have that open now. All right. All right, so it looks like half of you feel more stressed and half of you feel less stressed. So there's certainly reasons for both. We're experiencing more stressors and different kinds of stressors right now, and those are impacting people differently. So I can certainly see why there would be more and also why there would be less stress as well. But certainly some stress. All right. So now Megan is going to come on and talk about stress and where it comes from and give us some background information on that. So Megan, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Megan, and I am a clinical intern at Lighthouse. We're going to start a little bit just about talking about stress and where it comes from. Clearly, I think we all know that stress has gone up since the pandemic has started. And a recent study done in late June of 2020 showed that the rates that US adults reported struggling with mental health or substance abuse. So, as you can see on this nice chart, 31% of those US adults reported struggling with anxiety or depression symptoms, which is a very high number and something we're not used to seeing. And you can also see how rates went up with trauma or stressor related disorder symptoms, started to or increased their substance use. And then 11% of US adults reported seriously considering suicide. Um, so these are alarming numbers. And as you can see, there's many stressors that have come from this pandemic that are resulting in some very serious mental health issues in the United States. So now looking at Maryland. So in a similar study by the CDC, in Maryland, 1/3 of the population has reported symptoms of anxiety or depression. So, because of everything going on, obviously, there are many more stressors, and it's resulting in some serious health issues, not just in the US, but also right here in Maryland. So, we're kind of following that trend, and we see it around the globe as well. So, again, another study done in 2020 found that the global rates of mental health issues during the COVID pandemic, 29.6% of the global population has felt stress, 31.9% of the global population has felt anxiety, and 33.7% feeling symptoms of depression. So, I hope this brings to light the idea that everyone, not just in Maryland, not just in the US, but in the globe is struggling with what's going on right now with the pandemic and all of the stressors that it's brought about. So we are kind of here to normalize that stress, but also talk to you guys a little bit about managing that because it can be so severe at this time and so uncomfortable. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we manage that. So some of the big stressors that we wanted to hit on that have come about just strictly in the pandemic. One of the big one has been contracting COVID. So it's a very scary thing to have this this disease going around that we could get, and we could be very ill. We could give to the ones that we love. And that's a very scary idea. Another huge one is lives are being lost every day. And it's very possible that you all who are listening here have lost a loved one. And that is so difficult just in general, but that is a difficult thing to manage while all the rest of these things are going on. So, on top of these stressors, losing a loved one comes with sadness and loss and grief. And during this time, it may be really hard to deal with those emotions in an appropriate way. So, not only may you have struggled with this, but then you may not have been able to grieve in the most appropriate way, which can be cause some very intense emotions. Food, housing, and job insecurity. So, I mean, unemployment rates are at a number we have never seen, which is incredibly scary and leaving a lot of families financially hurting and not being able to make ends meet for food and housing and all the other necessities that they need for themselves and their families, which can be incredibly stressful. Marriage and family conflict. So depending on your circumstance, you may be seeing a lot more of your family, possibly a lot less. So if you have been ordered to stay home, you may be spending a lot more time with your family than you're used to. Or if you have been an essential worker and you've had to been out, you've been seeing less of your children and family. And both of these can cause some really serious issues. But both of them have caused, I guess, a strife in your typical family system. And that's always going to bring about some stress. Parenting responsibilities may have changed. You may now be a teacher or primary caregiver or chef, who knows? But those are changing all the time. Social isolation is a big one that leads to a lot of these depressive symptoms. So feeling like we can't connect with other people in the way that we used to can make us feel really down and bring about some severe uncomfortable emotions. So that's a major stress we're dealing with. Obvious physical and mental health issues that we saw are going up. This overarching idea of uncertainty, not knowing about the pandemic, not knowing about COVID-19 and how it's going to progress and what vaccines are going to look like. All of that is incredibly uncertain. And the fact that we don't have control over those things can cause a lot of stress. Online schooling, you guys obviously have been hit with that. And that brings about a whole slew of new issues. And then on top of all of these issues, we have the election that just happened, which has brought about a lot of emotionally charged conversations, a lot of media input, and things like that. And piggybacking off of that, there's been this this slew of social unrest that again has brought around some really very emotionally charged feelings and interactions and experiences recently. So if the pandemic wasn't enough and didn't bring enough stressors, then came, the social unrest and the election and political tension. So all that to say, there are an incredible amount of stressors going on right now that could be affecting you and your family. And so it's important to understand all of these and then work to be able to manage them a little bit better. Not to look past them, not to pretend that they're not there, but manage them in a healthy and effective way. Okay, so we're gonna do another poll. So thinking about all of the major stressors that I just kind of covered briefly, I wanna hear from you guys what your biggest stressor right now is.
We'll give you all just a few more seconds to look that over and put in your vote. All right, so it looks like about half of you are concerned about contracting COVID-19, and then the other half have been experiencing marriage and family conflict, which is a lot of what Megan was talking about, the concern about getting sick and then possibly um, getting others infected who you care about. And then the flip side of that is also spending a lot of time with people in your household, or the strain of not being able to see certain family members who you might be used to seeing.
Yeah, so all of this, all of these stressors combine to lead to all three: physical, psychological, and emotional fatigue, which I'm sure all of you can relate to right about now. So we're going to talk a little bit about stress. So we talked about stressors, but I think it's important to distinguish the fact that there is some good and healthy stress, but then there's also this idea of toxic stress. Um, and toxic stress comes from having an increased danger or demand. So that would be that stressor plus decreased control. And that would give us this idea of toxic stress. So healthy stress is going to look a lot like this normal response. And it's typically pretty short lived, and it doesn't affect your functioning very much. And it actually is needed for survival. So this mild stress is going to bring like some motivation that kind of gets you doing the things that you need to live healthy lives. And we want that kind of stress in our lives. What we don't want is this toxic stress. So these are those prolonged stressors that day in and day out, you feel they're wearing on you. And since they're prolonged or possibly very extreme, you're getting these long-term effects on your physical or mental functioning. So it's really affecting the way that you're living your day-to-day lives. And it can also come from this excess amount of stress. So when we have these compounding variables and these compounding stressors, it brings this excessive amount that is very unhealthy and can really affect our daily functioning.
Megan, quick question. I think we can all think of examples of toxic stress. We've talked about a lot of them right now, especially with the ongoing pandemic and uncertainty. Could you give a couple examples of what healthy stress looks like?
Yeah. So healthy stress is little tasks maybe that you have to get done through the day. So small work tasks that you need to do to get your work done for the day, or taking your kids to school, making sure that they get to the bus on time. So little things like that that help us live our healthy day-to-day lives are good things and things that we need to motivate us to get through the day and function normally. So then when we talk about healthy versus toxic stress, there's also this idea of control. So with the healthy stress, we have this high level of perceived control. So we feel like we can manage this stress. We feel like we have the resources, and we kind of know what to do, right? When toxic stress comes, we don't have that level of perceived control. So that unpredictability comes back into play, where we don't know how we're going to manage this. We don't know if we have the resources. We don't know if we have a support system. So right now, with not knowing what's going on, we have this toxic stress. We are uncertain about being able to control what comes next. And that can lead to some very severe and uncomfortable emotions. So this is a nice little diagram to kind of sum up that this idea of healthy stress and toxic stress. So in the healthy stress, you're going to have a low level of stressor and a high level of control. So you can manage it, you can work through it. But this toxic stress is a high level stressor with low levels of control. So you don't exactly know how to work through these things, and they can cause some serious issues. So we're going to talk a little bit about stressful thought patterns. So when we are presented with a stressful stimuli, our brains automatically will start to process that. And when we process that, we can get into some unhealthy thought patterns. So a couple of these include catastrophizing. So immediately going to imagining like the worst possible situation happening. So asking yourself, well, what if this happened or this happened, which can make you feel more uncomfortable than you will need to, and makes you think about the negatives when you don't necessarily have to. You may also take part in some overgeneralization, which is like coming to a conclusion based on a single incident or piece of evidence. So you're kind of just generalizing about things when you don't have all the information. Personalization can be taking things very personally, believing that everything that others do or say is a direct reaction to you. Or it could be that you see yourself as the cause of some type of unhealthy external event that you weren't necessarily responsible for. So this can look like basically just taking responsibility for things that were not your responsibility. A lot of us partake in should statements. So these are our list of things that we should do. We should exercise. We should be eating healthy. We should work 10 hours a day. And when we give ourselves that type of list, it can result in a lot of guilt. So if we're not hitting all of those shoulds, we'll feel guilty about ourselves. And it in this point in time, it's hard to tell yourself that you should do things because these are very uncharted waters that we're living in right now. Disqualifying the positive is basically what it sounds like. So thinking that the positive things were a mistake or should not have happened or don't carry as much value. And people pretty much just focusing on negative, which isn't going to get us very, very far. All or nothing thinking typically is just black and white. So either you were perfect or you were a failure. So again, in these times, it's not going to be healthy because pretty much nothing seems to be perfect right now. So it's important to find that middle ground of your thinking. And finally, emotional reasoning. So this is feeling that if I feel this way, that means it must be true. And this is something we really want to check because feelings are not facts. So we want to make sure that, yes, we can have strong emotions and we can have strong feelings, but we don't want those feelings to overrule our rational thoughts or our reasoning. We want to make sure that we are being objective in our thoughts and our reasoning.
Megan, I just want to hop in here real quick and mention some examples of things that a lot of people have been thinking of and that are really common and how those fit into some of these stressful thought patterns. One common example of catastrophizing that we've probably all experienced is having a runny nose or having a cough or feeling a little bit out of breath and thinking, oh my goodness, what if I have COVID? It's a natural thing to think about. We're all very scared of that, especially since we don't have a vaccine or treatment for that right now. But that is an example of catastrophizing, taking one thing that happens and going to worst case scenario. And while that is a normal pattern of thought, that can also add to our stress. Think about how much more stressful it is to think, what if I have COVID, as opposed to, oh, maybe I just have a little bit of a cold, or maybe, it's a little colder outside, so I got a runny nose from that. So that's just a very common example of catastrophizing that we see. And then to just give an example of should statements, there are so many things, so many stressors we're experiencing right now, so many things that are like we could think of as going wrong. So a lot of should statements that we are probably making are things like things should not be this way. Um, the regardless of political affiliation, the election should or should not have gone this way. um, I should not be this stressed right now. Our kids should or should not be in school. These are all like ideas we have of how we would like things to be. And while that is helpful in terms of guiding our lives and the things that we have control over, when there's all of these things that we don't have control over, focusing so much on the way that we would like things to be can actually add to our stress. So I know those are very common thought patterns that a lot of people, including myself, have been experiencing. So I just wanted to point out how those fall into some of the things that Megan mentioned.
Yeah. And another one of these big ideas that comes around during this time is negativity bias. So basically, negativity bias is the tendency not only to register negative stimuli more readily, but also to dwell on these events more. Um, so basically, it's known in our brains, and there have been a lot of studies that negative events have a greater impact on us as humans. Um, they can have a really powerful effect on our behavior, our decisions, and a lot of times our relationships. So, a lot of times when negative things happen, and especially in this time when there is a lot of negativity, we tend to dwell on that a lot more, because that's what our brains are trained to do. Um, and this comes from an evolutionary principle. So um, back during at the beginning stages of our evolution, it was beneficial to pay attention to negative stimuli or to danger or bad things, um, because they were essential to stay alive. Um, so so we would pay much more attention to dangerous things than we would about positive things, because this would help us stay alive. So now we still have that tendency to focus on some of the negative things. Um, so not only does this affect kind of our outlook on society and the pandemic, and everything that's going on right now, but it can also affect our relationships. So if we think about being in the home with our family a lot more than we're used to, part of this negativity bias is focusing on the negatives in people that we're around. So it's much easier, and our brains are much more trained to expect the worst out of people, um, and focus on some of the negative things and the things that we want to change about people. So this could very well be happening in your home, which may be exacerbating kind of this tension between you and your family members or whoever's living in your house with you right now. So that can cause a lot of issues, and again, a lot of uncomfortable emotions. And it's just very important to be aware of this, because we don't have to feel as badly as we do. It's important to know that like our brain automatically goes there first, but once we know that, we can replace it with a more rational thought. And of course, this is going to play into the news, and social media and media in general. So um, there's also been a study that shows that people are much more likely to believe negative information than they are to believe positive. Um, and pretty much the majority of the information that we've been getting from media the past couple months has been negative information. Um, so not only has this sat with us and really like weighed on our minds, but we also believe it more than we would something positive. So, again, this is really important just to understand and be aware of that there is so much negativity being put out right now, and we are already predisposed to pay attention to that negativity. So, next time you see some of these things, take a second to realize what your brain is wired to do and take a second to maybe try and reframe that and look at it in a different light. Not to disregard the negative news because it could be bad, but just understand and look at it objectively.
Hi, Megan and Catherine. Oh, perfect timing. I was just about to say, we have a question from the audience asking, how do I explain to my child that I am stressed?
That's a really good question. Megan, do you want to take it or do you want me to?
If you have thoughts on it, go for it.
This is a really good question. So first thing that I would say is that everyone is experiencing stress right now. So to a certain extent, like, I mean, having stress is normal. And I would say having a conversation with your child about stress in general would be a good place to start. Because I can almost guarantee you, not even having met your child, that your child is feeling stressed as well. Could be from any of the number of stressors that we saw on that list before. It could be because of fear of the virus, online schooling, if your child is doing online schooling, concerns about relatives, maybe even depending on how old your child is, the election, all of these different stressors. So I can guarantee you that your child is experiencing more stress than normal themselves. So I would actually start having that conversation and asking and talking to them about their stress. And then you can also use your stress as a way to connect with them, like to normalize their stress, but then to also bring in the conversation that you as their parent are also experiencing stress, because it's important to normalize that for your child. It's okay for us to be experiencing stress. We can do different things to manage it. But I would, like I said, I would make that more of an interactive conversation with your child, explaining also how I'm not sure what's happening specifically with you or in your household, but a lot of times stress causes us to act in ways that we later regret. Like, I know tension is high. It's harder to manage our emotions right now. I know I've certainly been feeling a lot more like irritability and less patience, and especially as a parent, like that might be exacerbated by having to care for a child. And so, explaining how some of the same things that are stressing your child out or likely stressing your child out are probably resulting in you having less patience or irritability or whatever your concerns might be. And just explaining that while that is not necessarily like okay, it's why you might be acting differently, or why you might be experiencing more stress than normal, just like they are. Megan, I don't know if you have anything to add or if you want to move on.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great place to start. And being open in communication is always the ideal way to do it. I also think just like some level of education, depending on how old your child is and how much they understand, but educating them on what is going on in the world and how unprecedented these times are, and letting them know that, this isn't typically what we're used to. And this is how this is what happens when things go awry. And then you can also talk about, modeling. So when you do feel stress, this is what we do. This is how we get through it. So you can model that a little for your child as well.
So hopefully that helps answer your question. If it didn't, feel free to follow up with us in the question box. We'll continue to monitor that. And actually, one last thought that I had that both Megan and I have kind of alluded to is whenever, as a parent, you're talking to your child about different things that are going on for you, a lot of times it can be helpful to use that as a teaching moment. So thinking about, with your relationship with your child, is there anything that you can take from that conversation and teach them? Is it talking more about what stress looks like in different people? Is it talking about your stress and how you're managing it and how you can teach your child to manage it by example? Is it talking about all the different kinds of stressors that we've gone over tonight, and how those are kind of piling up on top of each other and increasing everyone's level of stress right now? So a lot of times these conversations about what's going on for you as a parent can be really helpful for your child, not just in terms of letting them know what your experience is and helping them understand you a little bit better, but also using that to teach them something. It's a great opportunity in a way, and that was a really, really good question. Whitney, do we have any other questions?
Not a, oh, yep, one just came through. It says, when do you know when it's time to take a mental break? Any ideas on what activities to do?
Great question. So we're going to be talking about how to manage stress and those types of activities in the rest of the webinar. So that's actually a really great time to ask that question. And then I'll try to cover like how to know when to take a mental break in that conversation as well. If I don't answer your question fully, or if you have any other questions at the end of the presentation, feel free to put those in and we'll address those more directly. But yeah, great question. All right. So we will move on now to talking about, so now that we know all of this information about stress and all of the stressors that are impacting us and have thought more about that, what do we actually do about that? And Megan actually is going to start off by talking about negativity bias, which she was just introducing you all to, and talking about some things that you can do to help combat that and counteract that negativity bias.
Yeah, so getting back to that idea of that negativity bias, there are some ways to combat that because it can be so toxic and not great for our thought process. So it's going to sound cliche, but just stop the negative self-talk. So once you realize that you are engaging in this negative self-talk, you can kind of notice it, let it happen, but then stop it from going forward, right? So a lot of times when negative things happen, we tend to ruminate on those things. So we tend to think about them, think about things that could have happened, maybe why they happened, and your thought just gets going and going and going. What you can do is you can realize that you're having this negative thought, and then you can stop the thought process there. And ways you can do this are just to establish new routines. So right when you realize that something negative has popped into your mind, try to distract yourself with something else. So whether that be going for a walk or turning on the television or doing something creative, painting, drawing, checking emails, basically just something to interrupt that thought process so you're not ruminating with those negative thoughts. And then you can also try to reframe the situation. So yes, we are wired to see the negative parts of situations. But once you know that, you can acknowledge it and then look for the positives on top of that. So it's okay to realize that, hey, there are some negative parts of this situation, but now I'm going to see the counterpart so I can find this middle ground. So that's always important. And then when you can, take the time to savor some positive moments. So anytime that you find joy in something small, take an extra second to acknowledge that and feel good about that, and just be mindful with it. So since we are wired, like I said, to acknowledge the negative first, that's okay. It's just important that we interrupt that train of thought and then we give just as much thought to the positive side of things as well. And hopefully that will keep you at more of a middle ground mindset, and not just focusing completely on the negative aspects.
All right, so now we're going to talk more about what can you actually do to help manage the stress. So in the beginning of the presentation, Megan introduced that kind of a stress equation to you. So that is, again, the increased danger or demand or stressors that we're experiencing. Combine that with a decreased feeling of control, that's what leads to toxic stress. So the first part that I'm going to talk to you about is control. Like, how do we increase that control? First thing to ask yourself is, what can I control right now? We spend a lot of time worrying about things that are beyond our control. Examples of that, the outcome of the election. To a certain extent, we don't have control over whether we contract COVID or whether our relatives do. Yes, we can certainly take measures to to minimize that risk, but there is always that risk that's going to be there. And outside of doing what we can, things like wearing masks, staying home as much as possible, washing our hands, all of those safety measures, those are things that we can control. If we focus on things outside of our control, that can cause a lot of stress that isn't productive. It makes us feel more anxious, and maybe the people around us feel more anxious, but it doesn't actually help the situation at all. So I put up the Serenity Prayer here because regardless of your religious faith, it's a really good example of differentiating between the things that you can control, the things that you can't control, knowing the difference between the two. And then once you figure out what you can control, that's what you can focus your energy on and think about, okay, of these things that I have control over, what is it that I can change to decrease my stress? What is it that I can change to help myself, to help my loved ones? But like I said, we do spend a lot of energy worrying about things that we can't control, and then that often ends up leading to more feelings of greater stress. So how do we do this? So one thing to look for is asking yourself, where can you find that feeling of safety and security? So some of those things could look like religious faith, a partner or family member who you can rely on, maybe a certain place where you like to go where you get comfort, whether that's your bedroom, maybe somewhere outside like a park. Where do you find your feeling of safety and security? Another thing to think about when you're asking yourself that question is, what can you rely on? What do you know that's going to be consistent? There are so many things that are changing right now that are outside of our control, that are inconsistent. You know, the news that we even get about COVID is constantly changing. The vaccine, the measures we're taking, whether it's safe to travel, to visit our loved ones for Thanksgiving or not. All of these are constantly changing things. So looking at your life and looking at what is consistent that you can rely on, even if it's you have a grocery store down the street that you can always go to. They might not have everything that you want all the time, but you know that that's there, and you know that that is a consistent thing that you can rely on. So just asking yourself that, what are the consistent things, and focusing on those and reminding yourself of those. Because like I said, a lot is uncertain and changing right now. Second point there is daily routines. I know that this is really, really hard to do in quote unquote normal times. It can be even harder to do right now in a time of flux and when a lot of things are changing. But to the extent possible, maintaining a consistent daily routine can help a lot. Among other things, it provides predictability in a time of a lot of unpredictability. So just that in and of itself can provide that sense of comfort, safety, security, like I talked about with finding that thing that's consistent for you. Having a consistent routine can provide that. And even if it's not possible to have consistent like activities throughout the entire day, start with, if it's possible, consistent time that you wake up in the morning or that your children wake up in the morning, consistent time that you all are going to bed at night, consistent meal times. Those are the three biggest things and the three most important things to structure. So if it's possible to keep those at a consistent time or roughly at a consistent time, that's a great starting point. And then if it's possible to add other things that are consistent throughout your day, that can help you and that can also help your children. With predictability, it's hard for us not to know what's going to happen. It's especially hard for children, especially if they don't understand everything that's going on right now. I mean, we as adults don't understand everything that's going on right now either. But for our children, that's to an even greater extent. Get the facts. So a lot of times we feel a certain way and then we assume that things are bad because we're feeling anxious or because we're feeling scared about something. There's also a lot of misinformation out there. Megan mentioned social media and the news, how there's a big negativity bias in social media and the news. So yeah, if you turn the news channel on, you're probably going to, like 90% of your news stories are probably going to be negative or scary or terrible sounding. That may or may not be accurate for that. If you go on social media, a lot of people engage in some of those thought patterns that we talked about earlier, catastrophizing, thinking worst case scenario, what if thinking. All of those can then seep into our thoughts and make us feel more stressed and anxious. So one of the things is to just ask yourself, do I have all the facts in this situation? Do I know exactly what it is that's making me worried and if that's accurate? And then once you do get the facts, make sure that, or check in with yourself and see if the anxiety or the stress that you're feeling is proportionate to what is stressing you out. Now that you have the facts, now that you know what's going on, does your level of anxiety match that? Or are you worrying too much about it? And then making a plan. So one of the things that comes with figuring out what you have control over is once you know what you can control, making a plan for how to handle those types of things. So what do you have control over? And then what are your options in terms of dealing with these stressors that you can control? What are the changes that you can make? And even just thinking about like an actual plan, and I do mean like the details of like what changes you can make over a period of time to help decrease that level of stress. Thinking about that can be very helpful. And again, provide that sense of predictability and a little more sense of certainty that we're all missing right now, just because of everything going on. One other very, very important thing is to make sure that you continue to stay in touch with the people that are close to you and can provide support. One thing that makes it feel like we don't have control or we have a feeling of a lack of control is if we're trying to handle all these stressors by ourselves. It can be very isolating. It can make us feel powerless and hopeless and helpless. So sharing that with family, friends, anyone who's in your support system and can provide support for you, sharing all of that together is going to be much more empowering than trying to handle all of that by yourself. So to the extent possible, making sure that you stay connected with the people that you're close with and that you're sharing what's going on for you and the stress you're experiencing with them. Not to mention the fact that different perspectives, like people have different perspectives. So it's possible that someone else might be looking at your stressors in a different way than you do and offer a unique or helpful perspective or something to think about. So then the other part of that equation is talking about actually decreasing the level of the stressors and the types of the stressors that you're experiencing. One thing that I want to go back to briefly for the control element is it's important to keep in mind that it's not the level of control that you actually have over the situation, it's the level of control that you think you have. So a lot of times it can seem like we don't have control over a situation that we actually do if we stop and think about it. Um, and so part of it is also increasing our feeling of control. And so those things that I just mentioned are ways to increase your feeling of control over a situation. It's a lot more important how you feel about the situation and how much control you think you have. That's more important to think about than like the actual level of control. So how do we decrease our stressors? Turn off the news. We can get so caught up in the news cycle. It seems like every hour, every half hour, every 5 minutes, there's a new breaking news story. I don't know about you, but every time I see like that little red breaking news thing, like on my phone or on my TV, like my heart starts to race at this point because it's like, oh my goodness, what now? So taking a break from the news doesn't mean you have to disconnect completely, doesn't mean you have to lose track of what's going on. But even if you just take an hour or two or a day, just depending on yourself and how often you're tuning in, a break from the news can do wonders in terms of your stress, especially since we talked about how the news is gonna show way more negative things than positive. And so that's going to skew our impression of what's going on in the world too, and make things seem a lot more bleak and scary. And then underneath that, you'll see social media, another big source of negative information and negativity. That is a huge source of stress for a lot of people. So taking a break from social media. And actually the opposite can be true too. Stress can also come from all of the positive things that we see on social media. A lot of times, if people aren't posting doom and gloom, what they are posting is the best version of themselves. They're posting their happy family going on a trip. Well, not on a trip anymore, but in the past, like that was something that that we would see a lot of, or people posting their achievements at work, like, oh, I just got a promotion, or any kind of achievement like that. When that's all we're seeing of other people's lives, and we're not seeing all the ugly stuff or all the negative stuff that's going on for them, it can make it seem like we're doing something wrong, or like our lives are a lot more negative or messed up than other people's. Absolutely not true. All of those things are happening for those people, but they're not putting them on social media. And it's likely too that if you use social media, you're not posting all those things about yourself too. So that's good to keep in mind as you're using social media, but also just taking a break from it completely can give your mind the rest that it needs to just completely unplug from that kind of medium. Adjusting your expectations is another very important thing. It's not fair to expect the same things of ourselves or of our family or loved ones right now as we did before the pandemic. Megan gave you that super long list of stressors that we're all experiencing right now. It's very possible we don't even have all of the stressors that you're experiencing on that list. All of those things are adding up on top of each other and really weighing on us. Not to mention the fact that it impacts like our entire world and how we live our lives and our routines and what we're able to do. So if you're trying to hold yourself to the same standard as before the pandemic, cut yourself some slack. I can guarantee you that's going to decrease your stress, and it's going to be a realistic adjustment to what's possible right now. And the last point on there, physical distance. We need physical distance. We need to stay away and stay distanced from other people physically so that we can prevent the spread of the virus and protect ourselves and our loved ones. I really, really stress the difference between physical distance and social distance. I really wish that they were not calling it social distance, because that's not what we need and that's not what's healthy. Physical distance is what we need, but social distance is more important than ever. It's more important than I would argue before the pandemic, because we are all so isolated right now and we don't have the same level of in-person or face-to-face contact with other people. Humans are social creatures. We need those connections with other people. So to the extent possible, maintaining those connections is so important and is such a big stress relief. So whether it's calling someone up, trying to FaceTime or have a Zoom meeting with someone, Just maintaining those connections is a huge source, or is a huge way to combat that stress. All right, other ways that we cope with stress. So like I mentioned before, keeping your routines as much as possible, but also being flexible, like changing them as needed. If something's not working, if you're maybe already keeping a routine and something's just not working for you, those don't have to be written in stone. So being flexible with yourself as needed. Changing some of those should thoughts, like Megan was talking about earlier. The idea of things shouldn't be this way. Well, they may or may not, like maybe they shouldn't be this way. And there's certainly a lot of things that I can think of that could have gone better over the last year if they were handled differently. But if I were to focus on that, I would probably not be able to get out of bed in the morning if I was just focusing on all the things that should have gone differently. So changing those ideas, and also being able to recognize when you're having that type of thinking. It's good for us to have expectations of ourselves and of how we want things to be. But when we catch ourselves focusing on how things should be that are beyond our control, changing those thought patterns, acknowledging that this is just me projecting what I think the world should be like, but I don't have control over that right now. So I'm going to set that should thought aside, and I'm going to focus again on what I can control. And a lot of times too, we don't recognize that the thoughts that we're having are shoulds. We think that we need this to happen. Like I need to get out of my house because I'm going stir crazy. No, you don't need to get out of your house. You would like to get out of your house, but you don't need to. You will survive if you stay in your home. In fact, you're more likely to survive if you stay at home. So those types of thoughts, you may or may not be having that exact type of thing, but just being able to recognize when you're having that idea of I need to do something. Do you actually need to, or is this a should? Is this a want to? Making that differentiation can be very helpful for our mental health. Opposite action. This is one that is it's an easy concept to talk about. It's a lot harder to do. But opposite action is the idea that when we're feeling off, we tend to act off. Meaning if I'm feeling depressed and unmotivated, I'm unlikely to want to do much that day. And depending on how badly I'm feeling that, I might not want to get out of bed. I might not want to go to work or do my job. I might not want to talk to other people when I get home from work. Those are things that I am doing because of the way that I'm feeling. So a lot of times if our feelings can impact our behaviors, that means that our behaviors can impact our feelings. So if we change what we're doing, then that oftentimes has a big impact on how we feel. So if you can get yourself to talk to someone after work instead of isolating at home. If you can, we have to do the opposite action a lot of times. Most times when our alarm goes off in the morning, we don't want to get out of bed, but we do. And that is a lot more productive and better for our mental health and our salaries and our productivity than if we stayed in bed and did what we felt like doing. So recognizing when the way that you're feeling is making you act in a way that's not productive or not helpful for you, and then trying to do the opposite of that. A really, really like small and simple thing that can help is if you're feeling stressed, anxious, angry, sad, if you're having a moment by yourself, to just smile. Studies have actually shown that even if you don't feel happy, if you're smiling, you're activating the same muscles in your face to smile than you would if you were happy and were smiling. And our brains can't tell the difference. So it's almost like tricking your brain. By activating that smile, your brain thinks that you're happy, and you're going to start feeling happier if you do that consistently. So those are just, it might feel silly if you're feeling stressed to just like put on a smile. But like I said, studies have shown that actually does help. So that's a very small and simple example of opposite action. Related to that, laugh. Find something that you enjoy and that makes you smile and that makes you laugh, whether it's watching a funny video, whether it's talking to that friend who always makes you laugh and always has a funny take on things, whatever it is, just including that in your life as much as possible, because there is so much doom and gloom and misery out there right now. If I say negativity bias again, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, but we need to counteract that as much as we can, because a lot of that negativity is just coming at us and we don't necessarily have control over that. But we can control if we try to infuse our day with more positive things. And one of those things is laughing. So just find something that makes you smile, find something that you enjoy doing or watching, that's going to put that smile on your face or going to make you laugh. It's really helpful for mental health. Acceptance. It's back to the serenity prayer. Grant me, I'm going to mess this up, but grant me the ability to change the things that I can, accept the things that I can't. So it says here, the harder you push against something, the more power you give it. And that is absolutely 100% true. So we want to make changes of the things that we do have control over, but the things that we don't, and there are certainly plenty of those out there right now, as much as we can, accept them. Acceptance doesn't mean that you're okay with it. Acceptance doesn't mean that even what's happening is okay. Acceptance just means that you accept that that's just the way that things are right now. It might not be ideal. It might be awful, but it is the way that it is. And that takes a huge load off of your shoulders. That can take a huge mental load off of you, just to be able to accept that that is the way that things are right now. Get moving, get exercising. I know that that can be hard to do right now, especially some of us live in areas that are unsafe, so it can be hard to get outside. But as much as you can, moving, even if it's just taking a walk around your living room. Like, I know I am stuck at home all day now and I'm working at home. And so I try to, like, between meetings, just like get up and take a lap around my living room right here. I try to do that like maybe just 5 times, just to get myself up and moving. We need that blood flow. We need that physical activation. It's super important for our mental health to also have good physical health. So to the extent that you can just get up and get moving, doing some jumping jacks at your desk or wherever you are. If you have a pet, like if you have a dog, going on a walk, maybe going on an extra walk with your dog, just any way that you can find to get moving, even if you sit at work all day, like standing up for part of the day, if that's possible. Huge positive impact on mental health. Getting outside. Again, I understand that some of our neighborhoods might not be safe, and so that might not be possible all the time. But if it is possible, get outside. I know it's getting colder out, but we need that sunshine. We need that, like, a vitamin D from the sun. It's really good for our mental health to get outside and also to just have a change from being inside all the time. As I mentioned before, stay connected with your family, friends, and social network. I capitalize that for a reason because it's so, so, so important. So make sure that you're checking in on the people that you care about and that you're staying close and connected with them. Last thing on there, self-care. We hear that term thrown around a lot nowadays. And I think there's a lot of misinformation or misconceptions about what that means. Self-care doesn't mean like you have to go to a spa or that you have to take like whatever these celebrities do, like extravagant, like week-long trips to Nepal or whatever. Like that first of all is not practical, but second of all, that's not what self-care is. Self-care is the little things that we do for ourselves that give us, that re-energize us physically, psychologically, and emotionally. And that can be very, very, very small things. So one example that I have, very silly example, very small example, but it really does help me. I love chocolate. And a lot of times when I have back-to-back meetings in a day, or if I have back-to-back clients that I'm seeing, that can really be exhausting, especially by the end of the day. So what I tell myself is whenever I finish a meeting or whenever I finish seeing a client, I'm gonna have a piece of chocolate. That is just something that helps provide more positive things throughout my day because I love chocolate. And it gives me a motivator to get through whatever it is that I need to get through. So finding those little things, if it's not chocolate for you, it could be having a cup of coffee that you're enjoying, or really anything to eat or drink. It could be watching a video on your phone that, again, like makes you smile, makes you feel good. It could be calling up someone and talking to them, or maybe even venting if you had a bad day. So those, it doesn't have to be these big things. In fact, it's much more effective to have these small things that you do consistently throughout the day for yourself, than to do like one big thing like every now and then. Those small things that you do for yourself are going to maintain your energy physically, emotionally, and psychologically much better and much more consistently, than if you're just putting off self-care and just kind of doing something whenever you have the time to. Also, I plan out your self-care. That thought occurred to me when I said whenever you have the time to. A lot of times, if you don't plan out self-care, it doesn't happen. Especially, we're all so busy right now. We all have a lot of things to be thinking about. So be intentional with that. Think about the things that re-energize you and that make you feel good. Think about how to get more of those throughout your day. And then be intentional, and if it takes it, like actually plan, like tell yourself, okay, I have a break at 2:00 today. At 2:00, I'm going to do whatever it is that makes you happy. So really being intentional with that. I have these little phone batteries on the right. And basically you wouldn't let your phone get down to that red level at the top there. We are always trying to charge our phones and make sure that they're at the green level. So if you wouldn't let your phone get to that level, why would you let yourself get to that level? Self-care needs to be a priority. And a lot of times we don't think about self-care until we need it, until we get very sick or too stressed to function. Don't get to that point before you start thinking about self-care. Think of ways to incorporate that into your day-to-day consistently, and that will help sustain you a lot longer and the people that you love and your children a lot longer. Remember that this is temporary. Some of the stressors we're dealing with might not be. Some of the stressors we have might be from before the pandemic, and they might persist after the pandemic. But the situation we're in right now is temporary. Things will not always be this way. And reminding ourselves of that can be very helpful. I know I need that reminder a lot of the time because I get stuck in the way that things are right now, but it won't always be this way. And hopefully it'll be over sooner rather than later, but just a reminder that this is not the way that things will be all the time. And it's a good reminder for your kids as well. So I just threw a lot of things at you, and talked about a lot of different ways to help manage stress. Don't try to make all of these changes at once. Take one or two things that really resonated with you, that seem doable to you, that seem that like changes that you can make tonight or tomorrow and immediately change things in your life. Don't try to do it all at once. Like I said, just focus on one thing at a time, or otherwise you'll feel overwhelmed, and then that adds more stress onto your plate. And that's the opposite of what I want. All right, so last poll for the evening. So I just said take away one or two things from the presentation. So I'll open the poll up. Do you feel like you have one or two things that you can take away to help manage your stress better? And I'll open that up to you all to vote. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that, or a few seconds to do that. All right, give about 5 more seconds to get your answers in. All right. All right, so good. So it looks like you all have some things to take away from this. So that's good. That's exactly what I was hoping for. All right, so last portion of this is just to talk about resources. I won't go too into depth with these because you'll see at the end that you'll have the option, we can send these all to you. But I just wanted to briefly mention some resources that are out there that you may want to take advantage of if you're not already. So I compiled here a list of healthcare resources. Again, don't feel the need to like write these down or memorize these. We're going to send out a follow-up survey after the webinar is over. And on that survey, you'll have the option to put in your email address if you want this list sent to you. So don't worry about that right now. I just want to go over them briefly. So these are some healthcare resources. These are some for basic needs. So you'll see eviction prevention on there. If that's a concern for you, legal resources specifically for renters, a whole bunch of community resources at that one at the bottom. And then for mental health, we have different mental health resources for both Baltimore City and then Maryland in general. Online support groups. Remember I said it's so important to stay connected with other people. Online support groups, if you feel comfortable, can be a really, really great way to do that. Mental Health America and NAMI Maryland have a bunch of support groups for all different kinds of issues. So it could be for stress, it could be for depression, it could be for grief and loss, just depending on what specific issues you're dealing with. Connecting with others online who are going through similar issues can be very helpful and also make you feel less isolated in the struggles that you have. Specific resources for parents here. Some of these are to seek support if you're a parent, and some of them are things that you can do with kids that are free and easy to use at home. Facebook parent support groups. These are all groups, if you have Facebook, that you can join on there that are parents helping parents right now. So again, can be helpful to reach out to people who are going through something similar. All right, so we're at the end of the presentation. I've included my contact information at the bottom in case you would like to reach out for either with more questions after this if you think of anything, or if you want further information or more webinars like this. I say here, we're gonna have Q&A, but I wanna also say here, create a plan right now, write down 3 things, whether it's on pen and paper, on your phone, on your laptop, whatever it is, write down 3 things right now that you can do starting today to manage your stress. I say write that down right now because a lot of times we'll go to these webinars, we'll learn some things that are helpful and useful, and then we'll go home and then we won't remember what that is, or we'll forget even about the presentation. But even if we remember the presentation the next day, we might not remember exactly what it is that we found so helpful. So right now, while it's fresh, write down those 3 things, then you'll have them tomorrow and you'll have them going forward. All right. So Whitney, do we have any questions?
Not at the moment, no, but we can give some time if people want to type them in after they're done writing their 3 things.
Okay.
We do have a comment in the chat. I don't know if you want to.
Oh yes, I do see that.
Yeah.
So
Comment.
yeah, one of you said, for me, when the pandemic happened, I got on social media. I just deleted Facebook and Instagram. That's where most of my stress came from, and watching the news and making everybody's problem my own. Yes, absolutely. I think you did yourself and your loved ones a huge favor by doing that. It sounds like you're already starting to feel the benefits from that. So that's really, really great. Oh, and that actually reminds me, I think I alluded to it, but I didn't address it directly. How do we know when it's time to take a mental break? First of all, it's never a bad time to take a mental break. So that's what I was talking about with the self-care. Um, Always like infuse as much self-care into your day as is possible. Like I said, does not have to be big, just little things that will keep you sustained throughout the day. Um, and it's kind of like running a marathon. Like people who run marathons, they don't just run the entire, what is it, 26 miles? You can tell I don't run marathons, but like,
26.2.
thank you.
I'm sorry, it's quite the accomplishment. I had to jump in.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's great. I wish I could do that. Um, but people don't run the entire 26.2 miles without a break or without any help. Like they get help along the way. There's people like at stops along the way that provide water or replenishment or encouragement. So we are in a marathon right now. So you have to find those times to take those breaks or to get that additional help that you need. So first of all, never a bad time to take a mental break. When do you know that you need it? Well, checking in with yourself and seeing if your stress is manageable. And that's something that you can only you can assess. Like, is it affecting your ability to get stuff done? Is it affecting the way that you feel? Are you feeling more stressed or depressed or angry? In general, because a lot of times that can mean that it's time for a mental break and your mind isn't getting that, and that's why you're feeling that difference in your mental health and in the way that you're feeling. Look for signs in your body. Our bodies keep track of our stress and our trauma a lot of times better than our minds do. A lot of times we don't realize what's going on, but our bodies do. So if you're experiencing aches, if you're experiencing like physical tiredness and fatigue, and you've noticed that that's increased or it's different from what your norm is, really, really pay attention to that, and make sure that you're listening to your body. So those are signs that you can look for in yourself. Also pay attention. I say take this with a grain of salt, but pay attention to what people around you are saying. So like if you start hearing all of a sudden like people are asking like, oh, you look really tired, or maybe you're getting into more conflicts or spats with people, that might be a sign too that you're getting to the point where you need a mental break and you just need time to reset. So those are a few things to keep in mind. Do we have any other questions? Or, oh, I do see that we have some comments. Although I love the serenity prayer, I found that accepting things I cannot change becomes problematic. A lot of things I can't change are a result from things I choose not to put much effort in. Just my opinion. So right there, actually, I'm really glad that you brought that up. There are things that are beyond our control overall, but there are things that we have control over, like little parts of that we have control over. So for example, getting hired at a job. Ultimately, we don't have control over who hires us or if we get hired at all, but there are things that we can do to increase our chances of getting hired. We can prepare for the job interview. We can make sure that we have all the information about the job we're applying for. We can make ourselves look presentable and make people want to hire us more as a result. So those are the types of things I'm talking about. So the situation or the overall issue that you're experiencing might not be completely within your control, but then within that, figuring out what you do have control over. And even acknowledging if you're choosing not to put effort into something that may be beneficial to you, even acknowledging it, even if you know that you should be making those changes or you want to make those changes and you're not, even acknowledging that can still give you a sense of control over the situation, rather than feeling like there's all these issues that you're having and there's nothing that you can do about them. Even if you're not doing anything, it can be helpful to just acknowledge that you can. That gives a sense of control. Let's see, I've been feeling so angry lately, and I asked myself this 3 a.m. this morning. Oh, about feeling more angry than usual. Yeah, that could be the result of a whole lot of things. Stressors have a huge impact on our mental health. They make us feel angry, sad, impatient with people. So also just acknowledging that you're experiencing more stressors than you're used to probably. And even if it's not more stressors, it's certainly different types of stressors than you're used to. So that could certainly be it. And it could also be a sign that you do need either more self-care in your day regularly or a mental break for yourself, whatever that looks like. And really quickly, I just want to talk about mental breaks. Mental break does not need to mean that you don't do anything for an entire day. If you can, that's great. Like take a day for yourself if that's possible. A lot of times that's not possible. So I talk about taking mini mental vacations. What that means is 5-10 minutes at a time, completely disengaging from whatever it is that's stressing you out. If you can find a quiet place to be for 5 to 10 minutes, go there. Take 5 to 10 minutes to just be in that space. Maybe put on some music that you like, and just be in that moment for that time. If it's not possible to find a quiet time, savoring something that you're doing. So I'll go back to my example of the chocolate. If I were to just like pop a piece of chocolate in my mouth, chew it, swallow, and then move on with my day, that wouldn't actually do me much good. I have to sit there and actually like enjoy the flavor of the chocolate, be thankful that I have the chocolate. And I know that that's a silly example, but if you can't get that quiet, find something that positive throughout your day that you can savor, and really make sure that you're savoring it. You're experiencing it with all 5 of your senses. As much as you can, you're giving it your undivided attention, and you're 100% there in the moment. So many times when we're doing something, we're thinking about something completely different. Even throughout this webinar, I'm sure your mind wandered at some point. That's totally normal. With those positive things, in order for them to really benefit us, we have to make sure that we are paying attention to them and fully engaged with them. So like I said, if you can't take an entire day to yourself, find these like 5-10 minute mini vacations, mini mental vacations that you can take throughout the day. Do we have any other questions? I know it's right at 7:30, so if anyone has any final questions, feel free to enter them in. Winnie, I don't think we have any questions, right?
No, not at the time.
Okay. So that is, oh, one more, I see one more comment. I'll just read it real quick. My biggest pet peeve is not having the strength to cut off a lot of stressors. For example, not that this applies to me, but sometimes family and friends can be toxic. Not everyone has the opportunity to separate themselves from toxic environments. Just like children stuck at home or in toxic environments, how can adults separate themselves? Such a good question. Absolutely. Again, looking at the things that you can control. So if you can't control your environment, what can you control in it? Can you control how much time you're spending in that environment? Can you control your support system? So I know that we can't be face to face with the people that are close to us, but is there someone that you can call to vent to? Or if it's a really toxic or abusive environment, is there a way that you can get help? Can you call someone? Can you make plans to get out of the toxic situation, even if that's not possible right at this moment? So thinking about, even if there's not something that, I'll get to that in a second. Even if there's not something right now that you can do to get yourself out of the situation, can you make a plan to get out of there? That's going to vary situation by situation. But in every situation, there is something we have control over, even if it's just the way that we're thinking about it. So find what that is and really focus on that. What if I don't have anyone to turn to? That can be very, very difficult. And I know a lot of people are feeling isolated right now, more so than ever. I would say, look at those online support groups. In fact, there are support groups out there. And if you're interested, I can definitely send you more resources. There are support groups out there for people just like you were, if you're talking about someone you know who I will send that to you. Who don't feel like they have anyone else to turn to. So, again, going through, talking to people who are going through something similar. I am going to, I'm actually grabbing a pen so I can write that down right now so I don't forget to send that to you. So when we send out the follow-up survey, there'll be a place in there where you can put your email address. Thank you for the positive vibes. There'll be a place where you can put your email address. So just put that in and make a note in there also if that's what you're looking for the support groups for other people who feel like they don't have anyone that they can talk to or turn to, and I'll make sure to send you that. So I'm just looking up for myself.
And I'm also available if you all need anything at any time. Feel free to reach out to me via email, phone, text. I have access to all these resources that are being offered today, and then some that we have through the school to support you and your family. And I will definitely add that sometimes, even with the professional development we recently had to take, we had to be vulnerable, and we got partnered into groups and talk about different things that were going on. And I was partnered with this gentleman, and I was surprised that opening up, he and I shared some of the same issues that we were having. And I think sometimes it's recognizing, which was just done in the chat, and then having that conversation and realizing that you're not alone. You're not the only one. And if someone isn't experiencing exactly what you're going through, they may have experienced it in the past or something very similar.
Yeah, great point. All right, well, we're a few minutes over, so we're going to wrap it up for tonight. I want to thank you all for coming. I really hope that you're able to take something away from this. Like I said, we threw a lot at you tonight, so just taking 1, 2, or 3 things away from this and seeing how you can apply them right away, and start making positive changes to your stress management right away. So thank you all. Have a good night. Best of luck with everything going on right now, and then keep in touch with the follow-up survey if there's anything else that we can help you with. All right, thank you.